Hello, my Aloha tribe, and welcome to the Aloha Perspective, where you get a little bit of something and a whole lot of everything. Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday. Sorry, yesterday was a holiday here, and yeah, totally forgot what day it was. Yesterday was Memorial Day, which I forgot. So I said we were going to have a show yesterday, and then I put it on Facebook that we weren't because I try not to do holidays, just, to give people a break or whatever. But, and myself, not that I need one, right? Because I've had quite a few breaks. So it's 2 Mondays in a row I haven't been on. But anyways, so as I'm sure you read in the thingy, getting back on my soapbox today. Good morning, older sibling. And, I'm getting back on my soapbox today. So, and there's a reason. I have a lot of subjects I'm going to start talking about. I've been very inspired by a few things. Last Thursday we talked about like miracles and stuff like that, and not stuff, but we talked about miracles and things like that. Good morning, older sibling. Good morning, Muddy. And that seemed to go over really well. So I like to do all kinds of things, but when I came across this article, I was just so furious that I wanted to talk about it. So you have to excuse me, for some reason it wouldn't print. So I had to write it out, and you know how fabulous my writing is when I get mad. So anyways, we're going to talk today about the V.I.P. Snorkel. Now you're probably wondering, V.I.P. Snorkel, why are you so mad at that? Well, this was written by a retired Navy captain who writes for the LA Times. Take that as you will. If you hear LA Times, please don't leave right away, okay? I know everybody thinks that California is a commie state, which, if they knew anything about communism, they would realize we were anything but. In fact, the Russian form of communism tries to hold people down. California tries to lift people up. So all you people who just don't like us because you don't like our governor taking on the president, that's your problem. And I'm tired of trying to reach people that don't want to be reached. But this pisses me off. So I'm hoping that it reaches the people in that center area that still don't know which way to turn because they're so confused about their own politics. Because this is abhorrent, deplorable, and just downright disrespectful. So let's get going. The Navy's Inexcusable Accommodation of Kash Patel by Jon Duffy, contributing writer, May 20th, 2026. The USS Arizona is a tomb. That should have been enough. FBI Director Kash Patel took part in what a Defense Department email obtained by the Associated Press called a V.I.P. Snorkel near the sunken battleship at Pearl Harbor last summer. To accommodate that event, U.S. Navy SEALs reportedly transported and escorted Patel and his party by boat to the site, where Patel spent roughly 30 minutes in the water near the wreck. On December 7, 1941, a Japanese bomb pierced the Arizona's deck and detonated the ship's forward magazines. The explosion ripped the Arizona apart, sinking the ship in minutes. More than 1,100 members of the crew were killed, and more than 900 of them remain inside the hull at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Anyone who has stood at the Arizona Memorial understands that it is not simply a historic site. It is a place of solemn reverence. The silence feels different there. Sailors know this. Navy ships entering and leaving the harbor still render honors as they pass the Arizona. For a service whose dead often rest at sea, Arizona carries a weight few places can. It is a shipwreck, a grave, a shrine. The Navy has taught generations of sailors to treat that place as sacred. Much of the attention will focus on Patel, and understandably so. A senior public official who accepts that level of special treatment near one of the military's most sacred sites deserves contempt. Public office is not a VIP pass, and a swim around a war grave should not be a perk. But the story is about more than Patel's entitlement. It is about the Navy's accommodation. Someone authorized the use of the boats. Navy SEALs, by the way, provided the escort. The Navy's authority was used to enable a recreational swim around the resting place of American war dead. The Pearl Harbor National Memorial is managed by the National Park Service. The broader site involves both Park Service and Navy responsibilities, but the moral issue is not complicated regardless of who runs the site. Navy boats, Navy personnel, and Navy authority were used to support Patel's swim near Arizona. The Navy owns this disgrace. I spent 30 years in the Navy. I served on senior staffs. I have seen how things work. A powerful person wants something. Maybe he asks directly. Maybe a high-ranking staff member asks on behalf. Maybe everyone simply understands what he wants. Calls get made. An obvious boundary becomes a coordinated effort, but military professionalism requires more than sheer efficiency. It requires standards and judgments. It requires someone in the chain of command to know when to stop the machinery and say no. At Pearl Harbor last summer, someone should have stopped it. The answer should have been a simple no, sir. The Navy will not help you do that. And that is the deeper shame. Patel participated in something he should have refused, but the institution entrusted with the memory of those sailors and Marines manufactured a way to say yes. The Navy helped turn one of the few places where its dead still rest in view of the living into a recreation stop. Somewhere along the way, too many people treated this as a task to complete rather than a standard to uphold. The staff work succeeded. The principle failed. No one stopped an idea that should never have gotten past the first conversation. The military is not a concierge service for the powerful. It cannot allow sacred places, elite units, or public resources to be repackaged as private experiences for those who rank high enough, or political access to, a private experience for those with enough rank or political access to believe they deserve it. The Navy should be able to tell the difference between honoring a visitor and dishonoring the dead. It should be able to tell the difference between official courtesy and moral surrender. It should be able to look at a request like this and understand instantly that something must not be done. This was one of them. Jon Duffy is a retired Navy captain, and he writes about leadership and democracy. So you're probably wondering, okay, Shelley's on her soapbox again. She's being bitchy because she doesn't like this administration. I do not. Look, there have been a lot of administrations that I have not sided with. This is the first one I loathe. Because it's destroying my country, not their country, because they don't give a shit about this country. And I think that's become very, very apparent by the lack of disrespect shown there. Now, a lot of people are probably going to say, well, I don't understand why you're so mad. I mean, people going down to the Titanic. Yeah, and look what happened, right? But nobody went deep diving in it because you can't. I think the draw of Pearl Harbor and the Arizona is the fact that when you stand on the memorial, you can still see it because it's a shallow harbor. It's a shallow harbor. I mean, boat ships can get in and out of it, yes. But you got to remember, Navy ships are tall. They're very, very tall. And you can still see below the surface the hull of the ship, what's left of it. That was a very solemn day. That was the day that, America entered World War II. The Japanese knew we were coming. But what I don't understand is why people think this is okay. I know that there's been, there was also the same, disagreement about Titanic. And I'm sure I'm being hypocritical when I say this, because Titanic was, that was a seatime disaster, or a maritime disaster, of course. And that was, carelessness by the company. But that was unintentional. This was very intentional. And I think the draw to it isn't just to the memorial itself, isn't just to pay our respects. It's because it's something that literally ties us into World War II. It's like going to Europe and seeing, buildings that may have been rebuilt, but their foundations may be the same, like the bottom parts of the building, and maybe they built up because the bones were still strong. I don't know. I'm not really sure what into the rebuilding of Europe or even in Germany. But this memorial was erected so that we could honor that dead. They didn't remove the ship because they couldn't get her out. They couldn't get the men out. And because they couldn't get the men out because it sank and they didn't have the equipment back then, probably not even until maybe now, in recent, this century, or maybe the later last century. But by then, the memorial had been erected. And it's run by the military and the National Park Service. So if you're tooling around over there, and you're not with the Navy, you probably shouldn't be, because it is still military land. So the military will take you out there. Now, I had a very fortunate experience on the Arizona years and years and years ago. I did feel bad on this trip to Hawaii. Unfortunately, we didn't know that we could call or reserve ahead to get on to the memorial, and that is something we shall rectify, older sibling and I, in the future. But we did do the standby. Unfortunately, when we got back onto the tour bus, that's when they called us back, and there was no way that, we would have gotten back in time, because the parking is farther from the gate. So there's no way we would have gotten back in time to get onto the memorial. But that being said, when I was 18, my mom and I went to Hawaii, one of my last trips as a youth for the summer. And we spent the day together. It was just us, and because usually there's family involved and everything. And I met a very kind gentleman, and I was standing in front of the wall of the names, and it was the wall of the names of the people who had perished on the Arizona. There were uncles, cousins, brothers, father, son, and I was told this because there was a gentleman on there who had served on the Arizona and had survived it. And I didn't, I get very overwhelmed by history sometimes, and I didn't realize that I had started tearing up, and you just kind of do things automatically, and I was wiping my eyes, and he just came up to me and touched me gently on the shoulder, and he said, "Please don't ever forget. Please don't ever forget." And I just looked at him, and he told me a little bit about being on the Arizona. He didn't talk about that day. He didn't want to. He said, "I will not talk about that day," and I can understand that. But then his eyes became very solemn, because see, it's not just a tomb for those we lost on December 7th. Those who were brothers in arms on that ship, when they pass away, they have the option of a very special ceremony where the Navy will take their ashes and bring it down to the boat so they can rest amongst their fellow crewmen. So you see, it's not just a museum. It's not just this fascinating piece of World War II history that sits there. Now, this was 35 years ago, and this gentleman was rather up in age by then. So he's either really hanging on to the end, or he has since passed. And either way, I hope he rests in peace. Because the one thing that had this very bittersweet look in his eyes was that he knew when his time came, he told me, he's all, "When my time comes, I'm going to be buried with my brothers. I'm going to be laid to rest with my brothers." And then he told me how that works, and, and the option that they have. And it's typically only for those of the Arizona, the survivors of the Arizona. And quite a few of them have done it. Some of them didn't, and maybe their wishes weren't made known. Maybe they didn't know that this was a thing, but he knew, and he was a docent on the memorial. And then he hugged me, and he asked me one more time. He says, "Don't ever forget. He's all, "Please don't ever forget." And I don't know if it's because people come on there with just, I'll say, a morbid fascination, but I can't lie. I'm not going to be a hypocrite about this part. I have a morbid fascination about a lot of things, but I love history. And to be able to stand on something that affected me since I was a child, going there. The first time I went there, I was about 12, and we couldn't get onto the memorial because at that time it used to be a first come first served, and we got there too late. I mean, people would line up at like 6 a.m. for it to open whenever it would open, and unless you were on a tour bus, you were not guaranteed a spot on the memorial. So we never got to see it. But just seeing the memorial that was erected, I believe President Kennedy erected it in the early 60s, just to see it brings, I don't know, because the whole area really is a national park. It is built. There's a little like a molded diagram of the path that the planes came in on. I asked my grandparents, you know, for summers. I'm not kidding. For summers, I would ask them and ask them and ask them. And finally, when I was a little bit older, probably around 15 or 16, I was relentless. I'm all like, look, I'm not going to stop bothering you until you tell me about that day. And you could tell that they didn't want to talk about it because it was a hard time for them. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, it wasn't just the harbor that was attacked. The whole island went into shutdown mode. They had blackouts. They had to have blackout curtains. A lot of people just painted their windows black. They had patrols. You know, they would give you one warning if they saw you out, and if you didn't answer, you were out. You were like literally taken out. I kid you not. But my grandmother remembered the planes flying over, and she said she was hanging up the laundry for the day. My grandparents, I'm not sure if this was in the sugarcane camps, but I'm pretty sure it was. But my grandmother said, I don't know if the ground really rumbled, but it felt like the ground was rumbling. And then she saw just all these planes went over. And she saw, at first, you know, we didn't, you know, think anything of it because the military was nearby. Okay, Maui's not that far from Oahu. It's not that close, but it's not that far. So, you know, you can hear sounds and everything. And they were on top of a hill. And, but she said you could just hear it. And, you know, and then my grandfather, he was a stevedore on Pearl Harbor. And I said, well, what happened? He's all, I don't know. Once they started bombing, I just dove behind a bunch of crates and just hid there and hoped for the best and then got out of there, you know. And, you know, I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, some kind of heroism or something, but what could they have done? I mean, even the military was caught off guard. The night before the Pearl Harbor attack, the Arizona had been in I don't know if they performed in a band contest and won. Those details are a little fuzzy for me, but they were allowed to sleep in for a little, like a half an hour more. And you always wonder in those 30 minutes, what would have happened if they'd been prepared. But then you hear and you understand more and more about what happened and the fact that they detonated the forward magazine charge. And for those who don't know what magazines are, that's basically their entire ammunition supply in the forward compartments. I'm sure they had some in the back, but it was right on target. That ship had no chance. And men were trapped inside. And when, you know, I don't mean to trigger anyone here, but let's take a deep dive on this. No pun intended. Imagine being a man drowning to death who cannot get out of a ship, where there's little holes in the hull, where they're able to just maybe stick out a hand or something, but nobody's able to get them out fast enough because the ship is sinking so fast. To the point where you realize we have to leave them there. And then you have to make the harder decision. What do? We can't spend the time pulling them out now because we're at war. So this is just me kind of brainstorming on what may have gone on in those rooms when they decided that the Arizona needed to stay there. Because they didn't have the funds. Then when the war was over, they didn't really have the manpower or, again, the funds. Everything was in war mode. And then the Korean War started. So, you know, you're off again. You know, and then that didn't last very long. The TV show lasted longer than the Korean War. MASH lasted longer. Like, I think 5 times longer. But, I digress. Let's throw in a little humor, okay? But yeah, it's hallowed ground. I mean, would I think it would be fascinating to snorkel around there? Hell yeah. Would I do it? No. There are men buried in that tomb. It is a tomb. Okay? Would you throw a barbecue in a graveyard? Well, actually, some people might. I enjoy celebrating my mom. but I also don't want to set the world on fire because this is California. But that begs the question again too, right? Would you, go to the national parks and right in the middle of one of the most important battlefields where the ground probably still carries the blood of the dead, have a barbecue in the middle of Gettysburg? Would you throw a kegger in the middle of Gettysburg? No. Now, this may not have been a kegger going down to Pearl Harbor, but this is something that should have never happened. The Navy SEALs are a very elite unit. Now, one of the points I wanted to add to this was, did they do it because they felt like they had no choice? Because here's the thing with this administration. If you don't do what they ask you to do, or you don't do what they tell you to do, you suddenly find yourself out of a job. And if you think that that doesn't go for high-ranking military people, why don't you ask the lady who was the lady admiral, I believe she was an admiral, who was relieved of her duties. And the other lady who was, I think, the Coast Guard, in charge of the Coast Guard, or, again, I apologize, I didn't think I'd go in this direction. But why don't you ask them, okay? They lost their job simply because they were women. And don't give me this bullshit that it was because, they gave no reason. These women were highly decorated service people, service women. And simply because they didn't have a penis between their legs, they were fired. Because this is a misogynistic, administration. You're going to say, yeah, but they have women. Yeah, they have women. They tell what to do. And if they don't like what they do, bye. Bye, Kristi Noem. Bye, Pam Bondi. Bye, whoever other dumbass woman, just throws themselves and licks the boots of this shit kicker. Forgive me for getting on this part of the soapbox. But Pearl Harbor is very special to me, and it's very special to a lot of people in this world. It is and I mean world. When Sibling and I were at Pearl Harbor, there were people from all over the world there. There were Japanese people there. Okay, and maybe you see the irony in that. But remember, this is something that affected them too, because we dropped 2 bombs on Japan. And, we take pictures there. Yeah, we are not sure what the etiquette is when you're standing on the park grounds going, oh, there's an Arizona memorial in the background, and you feel solemn, but at the same time, when you take a picture, you're just automatically smiling because that's what we do in pictures. And maybe you're happy you finally got there. And maybe there's a thought that runs through your head that says, there are 900 men that are buried inside of this tomb. I should live. I should live my life because they didn't get a chance to. These young people. If there was anybody left on that ship that was about my age, now, I'd be surprised. I am almost betting that the majority of the men that lay in that tomb were all under 30. Maybe a handful a little bit older. But these are young men who never had a chance at life, who never got that chance, who were just doing their business that morning, because we weren't at war that morning until 7:50 something. I know, I don't know why I'm blanking on all these things. I used to know all this stuff by heart. About 2,100 men perished in Pearl Harbor, not just on the Arizona. But what makes it so significant is the fact that the Arizona had the highest casualty because it was one of the first hit. I mean, severely damaged. It was one of very few ships they could not salvage. And the fact that President Kennedy decided, hey, let's make this a memorial. Let's build something on top of it so we can remember how ugly war is. Now, I don't know if that was his thought process. And yeah, it is a tourist destination. Yeah, people are so fascinated by it. And I understand that part too. I mean, I'm not sure if it's still leaking oil, but I'm pretty sure it is, right? 80 years later, or 84 years later, 85 years later. Wow, 85 years this year. But there's a level of reverence that needs to come with places like this. And that's why I understand what this gentleman was saying. I totally on board with what Captain Duffy is saying. But also, I wonder if their hands were forced. I wonder if they did it not out of duty, but out of fear. Because that's what's happened in this country. If you don't comply, you get tossed aside. You get your papers and that's it. Years and years of a career that you worked for blown up because someone doesn't like to hear the word no. We have to decide what we are going to put up with. Because in Colville-sur-Mer in France, I believe that's the site that overlooks, I believe it's a site in Normandy that overlooks Omaha Beach. D-Day, 1944. A lot of American servicemen are buried there. So I beg the question, just like at Gettysburg, would you go out and have a barbecue there? Would you go and throw kegger in the middle of that very solemn place? No. And why? Because it looks like a cemetery. People see the Arizona and they find it fascinating, and a lot of people forget the fact that it's not just a ship, it is a tomb. And the memorial that you get to stand on is the biggest tombstone you will ever find. It carries the name of the dead. It carries the weight of that war. And it carries the sorrow and the pain of everybody who lost a family member on that ship. Sorry, I'm trying not to cry. But we need to bear that responsibility of being respectful of that. Now, if the AP had never found out, we would never have known. And so I ask you, if you do like this administration, how would you have felt if it was someone from the other party that had done this? Because I'll tell you, I'd still be pissed. I don't care who you are, right? President Obama was born in Hawaii and never did this, at least as far as we know. But I think even he has an understanding and a solemn respect. And just a reminder for all you people going, oh, you're woke, you're liberal, blah, blah, blah. I didn't vote for him. Neither time. Because at the time I was still a Republican, which I'm not anymore. I'm just definitely center left. I'm not afraid to say that anymore. You have a person out there that just, I don't understand how people can continually support this. His rants are disgusting. They're rude. No president in history that we know of, at least not in modern history, has ever said such vile and cruel things about other people. They may have gotten upset. They may have said, well, the Democrats this, but they didn't call them woke liberals. They didn't call them unpatriotic. I am so tired of people who don't agree with my politics calling me unpatriotic, okay? And brace yourselves, because here it comes. Fuck you, all right? Every single game that older sibling and I went to when we had season seats for hockey, every single sporting event I've ever been to, I stand for the Star-Spangled Banner. I stand for the national anthem. I hold my hand over my heart. I give people dirty looks that talk during it. You don't have to hold your hand over your heart, but at least shut the fuck up. Because I don't care how many times you sit through it. It's important to me. That's why I'm angry. Because I am a patriot. I am somebody that cares about this country. I am someone who cares about our dead, who doesn't think people of any caliber should be traipsing around and snorkeling around something so reverent, something so solemn, something so important to this country, a symbol of not just winning this war and helping to win World War II, but a reminder of how devastating it can be. And just a shout out, since we're talking about World War II, I'd like to give a shout out to Great Britain, because that tiny island held off the Germans. Okay? I mean, yeah, we may have had these submarines floating around the Atlantic, but they held off the bigger part. Okay? And Churchill, you are a hero. And I will always respect that. I watch a lot of documentaries on World War II, and the most fascinating one I think I saw was on believe it or not, Mysteries at the Museum, which I know this isn't about Pearl Harbor or the V.I.P. Snorkel, but I want to share this because I think they don't get the credit they deserve. You know, everybody says, oh, the Americans joined in and poof, it was over. No, it wasn't over. It took about 4 more years to be over. But, you know, maybe World War I, we came in and helped. But they had gotten, after all the blitzes, you know, the London Blitz and everything, and, you know, people couldn't figure out how the Germans could figure out how to get back. Well, it was because every place they bombed, you know, they would follow the fires in from the night before and just keep, you know, they were blind bombing. You know, I'm not even sure. They couldn't see. We didn't have the technology that we have now, right? They're just seeing fires and that's it. They're dropping stuff. So they got a retired general, I believe it was a general. They asked him to come out, not really come out of retirement, but they're all, hey, we need your strategy. We need your help. They created these baskets that were probably about 3 or 4 feet, you know, in each direction, wide and tall, and maybe about 2 or 3 feet high. And they were just these metal frames. And what he had decided to do was he figured out how they realized how to come in from France. And he says, we need to put these in other places and light them on fire so that they stop bombing our villages and our cities. And that's exactly what they did. They worked really hard on putting out those fires in the villages. Then they set fires somewhere else. And that's what the Germans followed and started bombing until they realized, oh, wait a minute, they figured us out. And then that was it. But we got to remember, America was not alone in this war. Other marginalized people, we had African American servicemen, we had Asian servicemen, we even had Japanese servicemen and Navajo servicemen going in, because Hitler may have had the Enigma, but we had wind talkers. They spoke in Navajo code because it was such an ancient language, Germany couldn't figure it out. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't know about. They were also assigned to servicemen. And if you were in any danger of being captured, they were so afraid you'd be tortured that they wanted this person who was with this Navajo person to kill him. This is what war is. It's ugly. It's not pretty. It's not a snorkel around a ship. It's something to be remembered and learned from. It's something that we shouldn't take lightly. My uncle at the time was in the Air Force, and they lived in the Air Force Reserves, but he was a recruiter, so he lived on base. And so my aunt, she found out how much I love history, and one day she decided to take a detour because the buildings on the Air Force Base, they didn't fix the bullet holes. They just painted them over. Not because they were lazy, but because they wanted people to remember. These were the scars. These were the wounds of that war, of that attack on that day. And, you know, my cousins were like, oh, why are we going by here? You know, we want to blah, blah, blah. But my aunt knew. And she says, we're going by because I want to show Shelly these things. And it's like, oh, thank you. And I was still young. But when I looked at them, for a moment there was this fascination like, whoa, that was history. And then there was just this darkening of that moment where it was like, whoa, that was history. That just became so much more real, so much more scary. I mean, once World War II started and we were, you know, in full-on battle mode, we even gathered up our own Japanese citizens and put them in camps, apparently for their safety. Which I will say this, the gentleman who was one of the Japanese people said, well, if it's for our safety, why are the guns pointing in? It wasn't for their safety. It was because they were afraid what people would do and think. One minute, this person is your neighbor. The next minute, they're your enemy. And I don't know how people can turn on people that fast. Because they don't know who else to be angry at. Don't be angry at your neighbor. But there are people like that. They get so angry, they get so blind angry that they just can't see straight. And when something fuels it and fuels it and fuels it, they're just going to get angrier and angrier and angrier. And then they're going to stop questioning why they're angry. and they're just going to hate everybody. They're going to call people names. They're going to follow the leader and just be rude to other people or say horrible things, or, just make everything political, and you can't have a decent conversation with them. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of weary. I'm like, I have, I don't know, administration fatigue. We'll just call it that. I have Trump fatigue. And for those people that are going to say, oh, she has TDS. TDS actually started out as Trump derangement syndrome against the Trumpers. People who will, defend anything despite being reasonable people. Just because, it's a party thing. I'm not about party. I'm about this country. And this country needs to come first. When somebody asks to go snorkel around a very reverent place where even now the Navy entering and leaving render honors, that says something. It is not a vacation ground. You may think so because people go there to see it. And some people just go to see it, and that's okay. I don't care if they want to just go to see it, because you don't often get a chance to get on top of something that's laying in a harbor with a bunch of men buried in it. You don't. And I can see the fascination in that part. I had that fascination. Being on there, I remember just staring at the ship, because like I said, it might be a little deep under the water, but the ship was so tall, you can still see it. You can still see it, plain as day. Go Google a picture of Pearl Harbor and they'll show you. You can see the boat and the memorial sitting on top of it. And maybe, just maybe, my fascination with history became more real when I met that gentleman. I wish I could remember his name to this day, but I'll be honest with you, I can't. The moment happened so fast and was so overwhelming. When my mom saw me crying, she came over, and she's like, is everything okay? And I'm like, oh, he's just telling me his story and blah, blah, blah. And he was on the Pearl Harbor and he wants to be buried here. And, and even he kind of just took my mom's hand and he said, thank you for bringing her. And, I asked my mom if she'd ever been on. She's like, no. It's like, really? You grew up here and you've never been on it? Well, yeah, she would have been in high school by the time it was erected. But yeah. So anyways, one of the other things that bothered me about this is that, going back to the V.I.P. Snorkel, so we all know taxpayers are paying for all this stuff. But that trip, over $50,000 was spent on that trip. Not for the V.I.P. Snorkel, but just by Patel himself. An FBI director who should be having better things to do. But, hey, when you're the DEI hire, okay, you want to talk about DEI? Let's talk about DEI. All right. When you want, yeah, I know. Older siblings said, that's like us never going to Catalina. Yeah. People sit there and go, you've never been to Catalina? It's like, no, we need older sibling. We need to go. We need to go. We need to get our asses on a boat and go to Catalina. I know we can see it all the time. So I think it's just one of those things like, it's always there. But, and I get that. But my mom wasn't big into history like I am either. My whole family really wasn't. So I don't know where my fascination of history came from, but I love history and I love to study it and I could read about it all day long. And being able to visit that site was amazing. That's why Stonehenge for me was so amazing. Not because it's supposed to be some magical, mystical place, but because, which does fall into my metaphysical feelings, but because it was so ancient. When I was in London, my friend was laughing at me because I do this, right? I walk up to a building and just be like, he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm touching something. Sorry, I know it's my TARDIS, but it's like, I said, I'm touching something that is older than the United States. I said, that just blows my mind. And then I would just go full hand on the building. My friend got used to it. He's like, okay, whatever. And then it was funny because, like I said, when I went out to visit them, my friends that live, I think that's Northampton or general area of Northampton, I believe. But Greensort. I can't remember. It's in my phone. But anyways, when we all went out to dinner, the three of us, because they were my hockey friends from California, and then they, my friend's parents were getting older, so he and his wife and his son moved back there. But I started taking pictures of doors. And why are you taking pictures of doors? I'm all, do you know how old this door is? I said, this door is older than the United States. And my friend, she was born here and raised here, and she saw, I never thought about that. So anyways, Buddy says, I love history too. Currently reading a book that takes place during the Dust Bowl. Ooh, and I'm really into that era right now. Need to watch the Ken Burns doc. Yeah, well, I hope you have an entire week, because Ken Burns, I will say this, I love his stuff because he goes into detail. He leaves no stone unturned. No stone unturned. I found a documentary on YouTube, and he did a whole series on baseball. And this thing is like each one is like an hour and 40 minutes, and there's like 9 chapters or something like that. So that's, that's almost 16, 17 hours. But yeah, older sibling. Randall loves doors too. I know, we actually talked about that one time. And because I saw one of the pictures that she took when she took her sons over there, and I said, oh my God, I love this. And she's all, oh yeah, she's all, I love taking pictures of her. I'm like, so do I. And so when she found out I was going, she didn't know where I was going, but she says, well, if you go here, there's doors. In fact, I have a friend in England that we are picture pen pals, not currently, because, they're going through a rough patch and a grieving process at the moment. But he'll sit there and tell me, he's all like, I was going to be disappointed if I didn't see a door in here. Oh, yes, Troy, it's Ken Burns. Ken, what's his name? Good morning, Troy. So anyways, Sammy says, I love Ken Burns too. His stuff is amazing. The ones he did on World War II and country music are my faves. The Dust Bowl doc is only 4 hours. Yeah, I guess you couldn't do more than that, huh? Because it was pretty to the point. But I believe I saw the one on World War II. Older sibling bought me the documentary on the Civil War, which I believe was Ken Burns. And I believe, don't quote me on that, but yeah, he does do amazing stuff. And in an interview once, he said a lot of people get frustrated with him because it'll take him years sometimes to finish a documentary because he is so detailed on all of this. So anyway, I digress. So, yeah, I had more talking points, but I don't want to get into those because then I'll just get mad again. But I do want to make this very, very clear that the Arizona is a place of reverence. It is a place to be respected. It is a place to be remembered. And I don't know if I want to say revered, but you understand the path I'm going with. Oh, yeah, you were close. Okay, you did do the one on Civil War. So yes, that's the one I have. And I thank you, older sibling. Older sibling knows me. She knows I love history. And I do. And I'm not the only one, obviously, because, Sammy loves history. Older sibling, she likes to dive into that. Like, those two are like my little musical people. One on Buffalo. Wow, really? On Buffalo and Bison? Wow. Where's this guy find the time? Has he got like 5 Ken Burns running around? He does a lot. He's amazing. But anyways, like I said, I don't want to get upset again. I don't want to start yelling. But I think I made my point. We need to treat the Arizona with respect and with reverence. The respect and reverence that it deserves. Not a VIP snorkel around it because, you think you're the shit. Because you are not. Okay? And yeah. So I think that's it. All right? I know. That's abrupt, isn't it? So that's it. That's all. But anyways, the list of Ken Burns documentaries is long. His daughter is working with him now on them. I don't blame her. Can you imagine? Can you imagine though, just, okay, we're done with the VIP snorkel. I just want to talk about this for a second. Can you imagine having access to all of these things? to all of these things. I have a friend who is on a website where you can download and look at documents of books and things that have long been either disappeared off the shelves or just people thought there were no more texts. And the reason I was asked, because, we shared the login because we know we share a streaming service. I share my streaming service with them, and, they're like, well, it's the least I could do for that. And I couldn't remember the login, so he set up an account for me, which, bless his heart, that was so sweet. I don't know if bless his heart is supposed to be mean, but to me, it's not, okay? To me, when I say bless his heart, I mean it very kindly and very, sweetly, because he's going to pay for it, so I can do all this research and whatnot. But we are going to have a show on Mary Magdalene, and we're going to dispel some myths. And we'll talk about things that have never been verified either. But anyways, the point is that going down into this website is just fascinating. Okay, it's like a deep dive into all these things. And, because, I'm very metaphysically based, there are a lot of books in there that were banned or, had been hidden that are now scanned and in here. They have no copyrights because they were written like 500 years ago. And so that's the kind of stuff I love, to read about these things and to get ideas. I'll leave it at that. But, because I am very magical. I know. I don't like titles because they tend to scare people off, but I do lean into the metaphysical pretty hard. But anyways, still spiritual. Thank you very much. But can you imagine being Ken Burns and his daughter and having access to all these things? Having all these things. Did you know that you can actually apply to look at some of the archives of the Vatican? Now, I don't know what they're allowed. I don't know if they'll let you see everything or just some things. Although Pope Leo's pretty progressive, so was Pope Francis. So who knows? Maybe they're not hiding everything anymore. But I will say this, and I will repeat it when we talk about Mary Magdalene again. In 591, Pope Gregory I basically called her a whore. He combined a sinful woman with Mary of Bethany. And suddenly it became Mary Magdalene. And, a former prostitute seeking enlightenment. Turns out, not even the case. There's no claim of that in the Bible. Not a one. It's called control. It's called control. This is why a lot of people steer clear of religion now. But yeah, that's a topic for another day. I'm getting pretty passionate about her. Because the more I read, it's like, whoa. But I would love that access. In fact, there's one thing older sibling will tell you, and it's kind of funny. We always joke because they get these old documents, right? And all the time I'll see people just going there and just flipping pages like, where are your white gloves? Where are the white gloves? Why are you not wearing the white gloves? Your fingers have oils in it. And as Bestie sent me yesterday, when you get bleach on them, you are making people soap. Okay. You're making soap out of your own skin. That's so gross. It's so, all I can think of is like Ed Gein right now going, oh, I didn't know that. Let's make people soap. Sorry. I'll eat people and I'll bathe in them. I'm sorry. That really took a turn, didn't it? That took a wild turn into a whole different kind of era and subject. Wow. But yeah, you sent me this thing on bleach and I was like, what? And then I said, I kind of want to try it, but no, I digress because I need my hands to write. But, I know. I literally will categorize myself under ridiculous. But anyways. All right. I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful day. Yeah. After that dark turn, we need to cut this off. Shelley Marie needs to be cut off. So anyways, I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful day. Bestie, Muddy, sibling, thank you all for popping on and talking. I love this. I love the interactions and whatnot. I really, really do. So, yes. Bestie says, you have a mouth. I do have a mouth, unfortunately, and sometimes it doesn't know when to stop. So we are stopping it. So anyways, I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back here tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Sorry, Facebook Live. All lives are public under Shelley Marie Lucas. Don't know what we're going to talk about tomorrow, but it'll be something good. All right. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.